According to the World Bank, in 2017, 49.6% of the world's population were women, accounting for over 3.73 billion people. We all know women: our mother, grandmothers, sisters, aunts, our school teachers, doctors, lawyers, and more. And while we know them in a plethora of ways, for the last 45 years women have known themselves through a singular theory on women's identity development. Founded by Ruth Ellen Josselson in 1973, Josselson's pioneering theory of women's identity development has in some estimates been cited in over 200 books and articles, with her 1978 study of the same topic being cited over 1,200 times, and her revisited 1998 study over 500 times. A clear cornerstone of the psychological profession, Ruth Ellen Josselson continues to be an advocate for women's development, currently teaching and practicing at the Fielding Graduate University in Santa Barbara, California.
Ruth Ellen Josselson really set the stage for women's identity development during the 1970s with her studies of Boston College women. It made sense for her to study young women, building out of the fifth stage of Erik Erikson's 8-stage lifespan development model.
That was Lynn Grasso from Florida State University. She's a higher education graduate student who's done extensive research on Josselson's theory of women's identity development.
Erikson's fifth stage of development, first proposed in 1959, focuses on adolescence and is titled Identity versus Role Confusion. Each stage, including the fifth, is marked by a crisis or crises. One study done by James Coate and Charles Levine stated that in order for adolescents to experience a crisis during this stage, they must meet 4 criteria. Josselson focused on the crises associated with being an adolescent young woman. It's important to remember that these crises are not necessarily conflicts or even moments of discomfort for the person experiencing them. Rather, a crisis is defined as a developmental turning point. Josselson also took the 1966 work of James Marcia as an influence on her 1973 study. Marcia was the first to propose identity statuses. Marcia's ego identity development theory expands on Erikson's crises and integrates a new dimension: commitment. In Marcia's model, an individual either does or does not experience a crisis based on their level of environmental exploration. Similarly, a person can choose to commit or not commit to new or existing values, patterns of behaviors, or ideologies they encounter. The resulting 2x2 grid divides identity development into 4 statuses. Josselson found the 4 statuses present in women's identity development as well. Her research found women either explored their environment and encountered crises, or did not explore and did not find crises. These same women also entered committed to a new or existing value set, or did not.
And Josselson had a lot to say about the statuses women fell into.
First, she expanded on Marcia's foreclosure status, naming it purveyors of the heritage. She described these women as committed to an identity without having explored alternatives. They often took on roles portrayed to them by external authorities, including their mothers. Second was the most brief status, daughters of the crisis. These women explored and encountered crisis without commitment. However, Josselson posited that as the number of crises grew, so does a tendency toward commitment to an identity. Women in this stage were seen as unstable as they continued their search for meaning. Third, Josselson defined Erikson's role of confusion outcome, Marcia's diffused identity, here called lost and sometimes found. In this status, women have not experienced crisis and have not made a commitment to an identity. Either because of lack of interest or lack of a perceived need to, these women have not established a clear definition of themselves. And fourth, Erikson's identity outcome, Marcia's identity achievement, Josselson defined pavers of the way. As the title indicates, these women have explored their environments, encountered crisis, and made commitments to their identity. Josselson's theory really is a culmination of both Erik Erikson's lifespan development theory and James Marcia's ego identity development theory applied to the development of women's identity. It's well-rooted psychosocial theory, one that many psychologists and practitioners use today. College and university women's centers are just one of many examples of its applied uses.
Of course, every theory has both supporters and those who are critical of it, and a theory's true strength can lie in its resilience to those critical tests.
I agree. Applying a critical lens to a theory and deconstructing it, looking for assumptions and power structures, is a healthy practice for any theory.
That's Ashley Archer, a graduate from Georgia Southern University. She joins us today to discuss some of the issues her research has shown related to Josselson's theory of women's identity development.
Often, scholars take on a critical perspective to deconstruct canonical theory in an effort to try and improve the theory. These deconstructions are rooted in understanding meta-themes like stocks of knowledge, ideology, hegemony, and social location at work within a theory. From there, critics like myself question the nature of what is defined as normal within a theory's framework. Specifically related to Josselson's theory, my research has found that first, the theory conflates, or at least is limited in study, by sex and gender. These stocks of knowledge that sex and gender are the same or are directly related, and that only cisgender females experience women's identity development, are potentially harmful as a theory is applied to transgender individuals who identify as a woman. Ideologically, the theory asserts that all women must fall into one or more of the four categories. They must be classifiable. But these four categories are only created by the interaction of two variables. The hypothetical introduction of a third variable, itself with two outcomes, will expand the grid to 8 categories, a fourth to 16, and so on. While this addition of variables will expand the theory's categorical bounds and cause classification to become more difficult, expanding the categories may allow researchers to grasp and understand women's identity development in response to crisis more holistically. Less explicitly, yet still of note, Josselson's theory also implies that all exploration leads to crises, and all crises affect a woman's identity development in some way, whether through commitment or rejection. Critically, we believe that a non-option of neither commitment nor rejection should exist, allowing some crises to have no significant impact on the individual. This is a critique of the concept of a crisis in general, and applies to Jane Marsh's ego identity development and Erik Erikson's life stages, as mentioned by Lynn. Another ideological critique that my team and I discuss is how the language of Josselson's theory may imply that women may not be able to move between categories fluidly. Instead, the theory suggests that until a new crisis or commitment occurs, women are static in their categorization. Theory also seems to apply that a movement from one category to another happens within a short time after a crisis occurs or a commitment is made. My team and I suggest that this is not true. Identity development is a slow and fluid process, taking time and moving through a theoretical gradient between dialectic outcomes. Finally, we must acknowledge that Josselson's initial 1973 study was based on 48 traditionally aged college women, randomly selected from 3 Boston universities. While the women were described as extraordinarily diverse, no mention of racial or expansive cultural diversity is included in the study. In a time where the national ratio of white to black women was 8-1, Josselson's sample group is not scaled to these national population sizes appropriately. Only one of the 48 women identified as black. In fact, Josselson's sample represents just 1 in every 14,471 women enrolled in college in 1973. This small population representation by the sample group is not the only area of concern, however. There are overwhelmingly similar sexual orientation identities, minute age differences, and close physical proximity of the women to one another, leaves the overall social location of the sample population extremely limited and potentially limiting to the theory itself.
Deconstructing a theory using these themes allows for exploration into its continued development and expanded use. Ashley raises a great point about the cisgendered orientation of the theory, questioning the willful blindness of the initial study.
Well, certainly we have to remember, the study was conducted in 1973, and while transgender individuals were gaining public visibility, the study of gender development within that population would have been nearly non-existent. But Ashley's points are valid. The theory could be updated to fit with today's more diverse society.
As I outlined before, One thought to consider when discussing the future of this theory is to simply consider this theory as it applies to all sexes. As of now, the theory's language seems very focused on female-identifying populations. Desexing the theory in this way may expand its application to a larger population that could benefit from understanding women's identity development. Already, my team has asked if transgender individuals may experience women's identity development. But even further, we may begin to ask, to what extent can male-identifying individuals partake in women's gender identity development?
This task of improving the theory is not without Josselson's support either. Concluding her initial study with the wise words, "The task remains to test these findings systematically and to develop less cumbersome research tools that can be sensitive to the enormous complexity of a concept such as identity." A big thank you to our guests, Lynn Grasso from Florida State University and Ashley Archer from Georgia Southern University. And of course, a big thank you to all of you, our viewers. As always, if you like this video, click subscribe to be connected with other EDH 5045 originals and leave your comments below.